Joy Reid, it is a delight to have you join us here on Assembly Required.
It is always a pleasure to be anywhere where you are, my good dear sister. How are you?
I'm well. Look, I personally find this vindicating is the wrong word, but this is the first time I've gotten to be on this side of the conversation. So I've got a lot of pent up questions for you.
Let them roll. Let them roll.
All right. Well, let's start with the media landscape. Last week, the Washington Post cut a third of its staff. They gutted their Metro desk, their sports desk, foreign coverage, which follows the fact that apparently America doesn't pay attention to the rest of the world anymore unless we're invading. And we know that over the weekend, the editor, Will Lewis, resigned his post. You have been talking about this for quite some time. We know journalism has been under siege for several years. And that's ostensibly one of the reasons Jeff Bezos originally bought the Post. But we know across the board, media businesses have struggled in recent years, and that layoffs have been hitting those who are responsible for reporting the news and telling us what's happened. What I'd love to talk to you about in this first section is really, there's some clearly motivated political decisions that are happening, and they're getting a lot of attention. And they're undermining how we understand the role of journalism in this moment. So can you walk us through what you understand happened, not just with the Post, but sort of this larger issue? And is this about a dying business model? Is it about Jeff Bezos' ownership? Is it about something we're not talking about?
Well, I mean, thank you for that question. And I think this is so important to talk about, because I think it can sometimes seem like those of us who are in media talking about what happens in media are just being self-involved, right? Because we work in this business. So we're like, if this business is dying, it affects us personally. But no, it actually matters for democracy. You of all people, because you are out here talking about these 10 steps toward autocracy, you understand it better than most. But if you look at, for instance, Russia, okay, the country that apparently our current president aspires to make us more like. In that country, a group of oligarchs took control of not just the means of production, not just the railroads, not just the utility companies, but also the media companies. They control the information that comes out to make sure that it aligns with what Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin want to hear. They make it very difficult for the few remaining independent media companies to do journalism, because those companies threaten the existence of that autocracy by getting real information to people. So they shut down anyone speaking freely, right? So Alexei Navalny, one of the things that he did, in addition to just plain activism, was he would use his online presence to speak truth over the wall that had been set up by the Kremlin for information, to lock information down. He and his young adherents were speaking truth over that wall. That is the reason that he was a danger to the Kremlin, and that is the reason he is no longer living, the reason he was jailed. In our country, our oligarchs are also buying up media, very aggressively buying up media. And keep in mind, these are the same oligarchs who also have massive defense contracts, also within their businesses. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, all these other companies, they're doing moon rockets. They're trying to do business with the state, at the same time that he is buying this venerable newspaper, the Washington Post, the newspaper that brought us Woodward and Bernstein, the newspaper that brought us the Watergate coverage. That venerable institution is now owned by an oligarch who has business with the state, who is sucking up to the president every minute of every day. That's what he's doing. Why would he allow the Washington Post to stay the Washington Post? That doesn't fit his business model. His overall business model is not journalism. His overall business model is not whether or not the Washington Post is profitable. He bought that paper knowing that the business model of newspapers was declining. Why would a billionaire whose goal in life is to make money purchase an asset that he knew to be dying? So it doesn't make sense to say he bought it and then he realized the business model was bad. Then he'd be a fool. He wouldn't be rich. He bought that paper for a reason. He immediately started signaling what the reason was when they pulled the endorsement of Kamala Harris. That was the first thing he did. Then the signal was when they took off the slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." That went away. Third step, he started to say, oh, the purpose of this paper is to talk about the economy, economics. We're going to talk about capitalism. We're going to boost capitalism. Step 4, Karen Attiah gets thrown out the door. People didn't react to it because this is a Black woman, but she was also at the nexus of race coverage and international coverage. She's Jamal Khashoggi's editor. So she's the person who brought him into the Post. She gets thrown out. She's the last Black columnist, gone. Now, step 5, all of the foreign coverage is essentially neutered. And then all the race coverage, gone. No more DEI coverage, no more coverage about race. And also removing the kinds of people who would have reported very bluntly and honestly about Donald Trump comparing our first and only Black president and his wife to apes. That coverage would have felt different and would have hit different coming from Black journalists. Well, there are no more. There are no more Black columnists. There's no one to speak truth to that power. And so I think the Occam's razor answer as to what's happening in media, what's happened to CBS with the Ellisons, who have defense contracts. Oracle's first big contract, their big first customer was the CIA. Oracle is a CIA-connected, Defense Department-connected company whose president and founder is saying openly on stages that they want a total surveillance society in which the police are totally surveilled and everybody is under constant AI-backed surveillance. His son now owns Paramount. They want Warner Brothers. They want CNN. You see where we're going? The media is being taken over and being brought under the ownership and control of a set of oligarchs whose interest is not democracy or truth or journalism. Their interest is aligning themselves with the autocrat such that we can have a total surveillance, totally controlled, totally supine, and totally obedient society that is also ignorant to what the regime is doing.
I write fiction. I write political thrillers. And there are those who would hear what you've just said and say that that is the stuff of fiction. And I'm so glad that you anchored it in the reminder of Russia, because you and I remember when Russia was a democracy.
Yes.
When the Soviet Union fell, they had a president who was not Vladimir Putin, and it was a democracy. And then the transformation began. And I think it's an important dialogue that we have to have, that the fact that it sounds fantastical does not mean it's not true. And part of what it brings to mind for me is the transformation that we have also watched happening with hard news center platforms for a while. We've watched this transition from hard news centered journalism to opinion driven journalism. And I think we can carbon date it back to around the same time that Russia was a democracy, back to the 1990s, when CNN had really introduced the world to cable news, and Fox and MSNBC at the time, General Electric owned NBC, and Microsoft wanted to get into the news business when they decided to compete with CNN. But rather than having that stable of reporters and the infrastructure of CNN, Fox and MSNBC opted for more pundit-style segments. And this was aided by the Reagan-era decision to eliminate the fairness doctrine. And I want to give us that history because I think to understand what you've just laid out, we've got to know this didn't start January 20th, 2025. This has had a long history. And so can you talk about the realignment that you're witnessing and why hard news not just matters in this moment, but who's fighting for it in this moment?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the artist formerly known as MSNBC. The Ms. in Ms. now stands for My Source, but it used to stand for Microsoft, whose oligarch owner, Bill Gates, features very prominently in the Epstein files, as do all of these oligarchs, all of these techno-feudalists. You could also call them techno-fascists. Weirdly enough, they were all cuddling up to Jeffrey Epstein post his 2008 conviction. Pre his indictment, he never made it to trial, and Ghislaine Maxwell's indictment, right? Very interesting that all these tech bros, the Steve Bannons of the world, the Elon Musks of the world, the Peter Thiels of the world, and Bill Gates were all cuddling up to this guy. And they all had this interest in a total surveillance state and in creating a uniform information economy that they control. This is a conversation all of these people were having. And I think you should put a pin in that and keep that in mind as we continue to talk about these cable entities. As to your point, when Ted Turner created the cable news network, it was actually a revelation for those of us who were news junkies. The idea that we could get news 24/7, music to my mama's ears, because we were like news junkies. We were watching Nightline every night. I was like a sixth grade nerd. I just loved watching the news, and my mom was a news junkie as well. So CNN was like a cool idea when it first started. The idea that you could get news and also international news, because one of the things this is not a new thing. Americans have really never been that interested in international news, right? Which put us at a deficit. When you go to Europe and they get so much global news, we didn't. So we didn't really understand in the United States why students in Iran would take our hostages in the 1970s. A lot of Americans just didn't understand why that happened because we really didn't do international news. But CNN gave us that opportunity. They had bureaus all over the world. They were an international news organization. But then along comes a guy named Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch, who said, we can take that model and we can use it to the benefit of the Republican Party. And so Fox News was created in the late 1990s, in 1996. It was around 1996 during the Clinton era to take that same CNN model and direct it and throw it as a weapon against Democrats. But know that Roger Ailes also created MSNBC. Roger Ailes is also the guy behind that. And when MSNBC first started as American News Network, it had both right-wing and left-wing shows, and they were all about the pugilism of right versus left, creating this amygdala response kind of quote-unquote journalism that was really all about the two sides shouting at each other. And CNN also brought that model into its orbit when they created Crossfire, because they needed to compete with these two new networks that were doing basically Crossfire 24 hours a day. That absolutely warped and changed the purpose of news. It changed the purpose because hard news and hard journalism became less important than getting ratings and keeping people watching and keeping people excited. Notice that CNN would have breaking news on everything. Stuff that wasn't even really breaking news. It would just always say breaking news, and it kept you like fired up emotionally, so you would just keep watching. That model has not been good for journalism, but the one piece I will say that CNN did still contribute to the world was that global perspective. You could actually get news from around the world. If you go to Europe, CNN International is actually quite a great network. But now you're seeing all that broken because now all that seems to matter is getting that amygdala going, and you get less and less news with your excitement and sort of your sort of outrage. I will say that at MSNBC, the artist formerly known as MSNBC, the one thing I will give them credit for is that because we were tied to NBC News, all the outrage was tied to journalism. We weren't allowed to just get up there and lie. We had a standards and practices department. So if we just had a feeling that Trump was a bad guy, we couldn't just get up there and say that. We needed to actually have evidence. We needed to have something to say that was journalistically based. Then we could say what we were going to say, but it had to be based on journalism. Fox doesn't have that. They don't have a standards and practices department. They can just get up there and say Bill Clinton is the devil, and they don't even have to back that up. They can say all black people are criminals. The only criminals are black. All trans people are trying to, attack your children in schools. They shouldn't be teachers. They can just say whatever they want. They can say whatever they want about immigrants. And for a lot of Americans, that and Rush Limbaugh when he was alive is the news. They didn't see anything. They thought fair and balanced meant it says what I want to hear. That channel tells me what I believe in my gut. Therefore, that's fair and balanced. And anything that doesn't do that is biased. And so we've created this false belief about bias that has not just warped right-wing news, it's warped regular news, because people at the normal networks, the CBSs, the ABCs, and the NBCs, are terrified to be seen as biased against conservatives. So they're holding back. They're pulling back on telling the truth because they think the truth sounds biased. So I think it's been bad for everyone. And then the last thing I'll add, then you throw in social media. You throw in the artist formerly known as Twitter. You throw in TikTok and everything else. Now people can choose your own adventure. Now people are like, I only want news that tells me what I want to hear. I only want information that tells me what I want to hear. And the thing I really worry about, Stacey, what I really, really worry about is that now that some of those entities are owned by the oligarchs, they're now going to start to limit what you know to also what the state wants you to know. They're going to start to limit what a few of us out here are trying to do, which is to say, wait, without a corporate minder, we can tell you the truth. We can tell you what you're not being told, but we also need to know that the platform we're on doesn't shut us up as well.
Well, I want to unpack a few of the things you lifted up because I think that's the crux of my worry. Step 6 of the 10 steps to authoritarianisms and autocracy. Step 6 is you attack the truth. And that by attacking the truth, you reshape reality, because it's not just about saying truth doesn't exist and firing everyone. It's about filling the void with propaganda and reshaping what people understand to be what actually is. Don't believe the evidence of your lying eyes. So Joy, you began your career in journalism, but then you built a national brand as a political commentator. You are known as someone who would leverage your platform to provide a mix of hard news, but also political insights and social commentary. Your MSNBC show, The Reid Out, however, was canceled last year, but your new endeavor, as you just pointed out, is now fully independent. It is not platform dependent for its content, but it is platform dependent for its dissemination. You've said that the cancellation was liberating, but you also express worry about what happened next. And as more and more journalism comes from this sort of hybrid model that you've pioneered, so what excites you and what should the audience be looking for if it wants to understand what is the truth?
Yeah, and I'll start with what worries me before I get to what excites me, because I pretty much live in worry before I live in excitement in these moments. What worries me about the platforms that we all sort of have depended on for years, that even if they felt like they lean liberal, and even if they still do, I mean, frankly, they also are only a part of the business of these bigger companies who are concerned about whether Brendan Carr will come for them. And even though the FCC does not regulate cable news, these companies are merged to other businesses that the federal government can regulate. So there's always this threat. I mean, we're hearing these rumors that Trump has ordered the FCC to investigate The View and to try to apply a version of the fairness doctrine against them, essentially saying, we're going to bully you into platforming far-right conservative politicians. If you put on one Democrat, you need to put on one of those, and for balance. That suddenly it's like you must platform liars, you must platform crypto fascists, and if you don't, we're coming for you. And if you say that to Disney, that has all these other businesses, they don't have to order the people at The View to be silent. They can just really scrutinize everything they say at that table, to the point where they get really uncomfortable if Joy Behar or Sunny Holston says something, or Anna Navarro says something that sounds disparaging about the president. They can just, and that is what I felt when I worked in mainstream media. It's not that they ever told us what to say. It's that you knew that you were going to get a call if you said something that irritated the president, or you were told if he tweets at you, you can't respond. You need to not respond, because if you respond, that could get your bosses in trouble. It could get the company in trouble. You're jeopardizing the company. And so people feel that burden that I don't want to be the reason. I don't want to be the reason that our company gets sued. I don't want to be the reason my team gets laid off. So you start to censor yourself, and you start to get just more generic party platforming, where it's very much the Democratic Party says this, here is a Democrat, and they say that here, and a lot less analysis from the person in the chair. And in many cases, the people in the chair are people like me who come from both journalism and politics. So we have something to give, to offer, because we worked in politics like you did. You know what I mean? It's like we kind of know how the political and the campaign piece works. So we're adding that analysis to the situation. Well, maybe you add it a little bit more quietly. And that's what they're hoping for. And that's what they fear, which I wouldn't do. On the Joy Reid Show, I'm going to say exactly what I know. If I don't know, I'm going to admit I don't know. I'm going to tell you what I am hearing behind the scenes. I'm going to share what I'm learning. And I'm going to give you journalism, but I can give my opinion free of that fear, at least until these platforms start to shut us down.